What's up, guys, and welcome back to Wagwa Friends English.
Today, we are addressing you advanced English learners who are trying to get to fluency, but maybe you're struggling with that. Maybe you're having problems with, what do I do?
How do I study?
Your intermediate English is not working anymore. Your study methods that you've relied on to get you to this point are no longer giving you enough. Maybe a little bit here and there, but it's not enough to become fluent. So, what you need are some routines in your back pocket that you can choose from whenever you have a minute.
Let's talk about it. First and foremost, one of the biggest things that you can do to change from intermediate study habits to advanced study habits is to focus on one thing.
One little thing.
Like a book chapter or part of an episode, not a whole movie.
No.
The goal is to get something where you can really see the intricacies of English, and you can't do that with a huge, long content kind of material.
Of course, it's good if you understand the greater context, like for the rest of that book, for example, or you kind of understand where it's coming from or what it's about. But ideally, you're not going to spend more than 5 minutes on this section, this little piece of content that you're going to work on in a deep study method. One mistake that people make often in this realm is they do too much. They bite off way more than they can chew, whether in difficulty level or they make something that takes too long. Maybe it takes them 10 or 20 minutes to go over it the first time. And when that happens, you're really not going to go through in a deep study method fashion. You're going to go through it and kind of do what you can to grab what you can from it because it takes too long to go through it the first time.
Ultimately, it's rushed, right? It feels more like cramming than learning. That's why a really surprising method that you can do for an advanced routine is to actually go through the material without taking notes first.
Right.
So the goal is just to kind of give a general understanding of what that chapter or what that video is saying before you start breaking it down.
Right. Get the big picture first. Once you have the big picture, once you've listened to or read through the whole thing one time, then think about it. Jot down a few notes. That's the best way that I find personally is to jot down a few notes, but you can also speak and record yourself speaking a few ideas that you have at the end of it. But try to write down your observations, things that you noticed about it. What is it generally about? What is the point of the whole passage? What is the point of it in the greater context if it's something within a larger book or within a larger TV episode?
And frankly, this is one of the most difficult things that any English learners do is not just taking the information, but summarizing it in their own words briefly. That is an extremely difficult skill to do. And if you do it from the get-go, from the beginning, then you're able to process some of the details a little bit easier.
Now that you've been over it and you've written down a few things, just really quickly, just give yourself like a minute or 2 minutes to write down some main observations. This shouldn't take long. So ideally, you're 5 minutes into looking over it, 1-2 minutes spent on writing down some basic observations. Next, you're actually going to go through the material very slowly and meticulously to pick out the words, the phrases, the grammar, the idioms, things that you don't understand. Go through, look it up, write it down, piece it together, and understand the text.
And a big part of this is not to grasp every single vocabulary term, every single idiom. It's trying to find the main ones, the key terms. This will help you on test taking, but it also helps with being able to understand the information. If there is a word, like I said earlier, get-go, that you don't know, that's okay, as long as it's not critical to that information. So you're trying to find these critical pieces of grammar and idioms that are confusing, and then break those down and try to zero in on them.
Zero in on them, but then step back and connect them to the broader meaning. Which is why the next step is to go over this again without looking things up, without pausing and starting and things like that. Now that you've taken the time to really break it down and get into it, maybe this took you 15, maybe even 20 minutes. Take that and apply it immediately by listening or reading through again without stopping. Take that knowledge and put it to work immediately. And it's important that you do this in the same sitting, in the same study session. Take what you really looked up and then apply it immediately by not relying on any crutches. Don't go back to your notes. Don't go back to the dictionary. Take it in again without looking at all all the crutches that you have around you.
You get repetition doing that, which means that those vocabulary terms that you just studied will stick better, but also you'll be able to comprehend more of the nuances of the passage itself. If you don't know some critical key words at the first part, you're supposed to skip past them, but then you're supposed to get into those. What do those mean? Why are you saying it that way? And then the second time you read it, you'll be amazed at how well you understand it just by being able to look those up.
After you have gone through it again, just taking it in without relying on your crutches, write down some notes, maybe circle and take note of the words or the terms or the phrases that you had just studied in the second major step, but write those down and make sure that you go over those again real quick. Then you're going to write questions. Ask yourself critical questions about the text or the content that you just took in, that you've been looking at for the day. These are everything from why is the author or the speaker saying this? Who is the audience? What cultural thing are they bringing in here? What are some things in the culture that are needed for me to understand what is meant, intended by the author to the intended audience? What is the connection here? Why are they saying it? What kind of emotion would this instill in the audience? You need to be asking critical questions like this in order to understand, again, stepping back, connecting that piece to the culture it's from.
And I would only add that you should ask 2 questions. Number 1 is, why is the author saying this? The second one is, why didn't the author say this? Why didn't they say this idiom instead of this idiom? Instead of saying long time no see, why did they say, man, I haven't seen you in years? What is the difference of meaning there? And why didn't they say this idiom that I know that they know? Those kinds of questions will push you into fluency very quickly.
This is helping you create memory hooks by tying things in with the culture and idioms and the context. Note the paralanguage. If you're watching something, make sure you're noting paralanguage that the speakers have as they're speaking. Make sure you're taking those things, and in this stage, you are tying things together. You're asking questions, you're seeking to answer them and looking them up. And the easiest way to do this is to really have a tutor or a teacher or a friend from the culture that this piece is from to answer those questions for you. They may not have really directly thought of it. To be honest, there's questions I get from my students sometimes and I'm like, that's a really good question. I know the answer because I'm from this culture and I just got it automatically, but here's the cultural thing. Here's the connection behind it. Definitely ask your tutor if you have one. Take advantage of that relationship, being able to just ask questions.
They will be able to see why something wasn't said when it could have been said.
Right. Which is incredibly important to be able to understand and become fluent.
These last 2 things in your study routine, nobody wants to do because they are a little time intensive and they take a lot of effort. And that is to write or record a response to this article. So it's not just a matter of reading comprehension, but it's a matter of being able to then process that information, write a brief summary on it, state your opinion on it, and conclude with any final thoughts of how could we push this a little further in another area.
Or questions to look out for and the culture pertaining to this topic. This is the step that nobody wants to do by themselves, but they will hire a tutor or a teacher to keep them accountable to doing. If you really want to go from advanced to fluent, this is a great way to do it. You've got to do something with the information that you've just broken down. It is not enough to dive into something, dive into a piece, deal with it, look up all these words and understand the questions and talk about it with a friend and then do nothing with it after that. You've got to write it down or record yourself speaking about it and put that into a file somewhere where you can refer back to it. 1, it will give you a history log to see how well your English has progressed over the recent weeks. But 2, it's going to help you do something with critical thinking about the thing. So asking questions about it in the last step is important, but now you need to actually synthesize the information, condense it down into a summary, and then give your opinion on it.
And the last one is to just pick a term or an idiom or a grammatical structure and use that term throughout the day and throughout the week. If you can do this, what it is it's basically connecting your brain with all of the information, not just some of it, but all of the information that you learned in that article or that video, and you're basically bringing that up every time you say that word. It's recalling the word, but but more importantly, it's recalling the whole study session that you just invested your time into.
So we have some words of advice for you to help you just do this realistically. Of course, the study routine sounds awesome. You take 5 minutes of practice and you go over it again and again and again. You break it down and all these things. Of course, that sounds great, but it also sounds unrealistic for somebody who doesn't just have an hour of their time to give. We have a few things to help you make this a far more realistic routine to use in your daily life.
And number one is to just don't mix English grammars. If you are studying something, try to focus on what we have said before.
One accent to really focus on.
For one type of grammar, so that when you're studying an article and if it's written in British English, there are some different grammatical rules using that grammar. If you mix it up, then it's going to be hard when you're asking these questions of why do they put this extra O there? Or why do they put this extra U there or E there?
S instead of Z, or why do they say mustn't? I haven't heard an American say mustn't before. It's because we don't. It's good to have that. We're not saying draw like this wall and you only study American English, or you only study Australian English, or whatever. We're not saying that. What we are saying, though, is that you should primarily focus deep study methods on the particular English you are trying to become fluent in. You are just going to confuse the mess out of yourself if you try to do a little bit of this and a little bit of South African English, a little bit of British English, a little bit of this. It's going to be too much, it's going to be confusing, it's going to conflict in your head until you get really good at one, and then you can branch out into those others if you so choose.
Our second piece of advice for you guys is to do as much as possible in English throughout your daily life. This has been a thing that we have said on this channel for many videos, but it's to create an English learning lifestyle, an English learning home, so that even when you're not in that deep study session, you are still learning and still growing.
Right. For many of you who are advanced speakers, a lot of you, maybe you work in the US. For you, you literally live and work in English, and that is totally fine. But if you don't live here, then you need to fabricate that somehow, which means you need to be resting in English. You need to be watching TV shows in English. You need to be watching YouTube in English. You need to be listening to music in English. You need to take in English as much as possible. And that means resting in English as much as possible. As not restful as it is. We understand. We've been there. If you are going to grow to become fluent, you've got to be able to think in the language. You've got to be able to do things in the language. You basically want to be able to dream in the language. So that means applying yourself, giving yourself lots of passive listening practice, as well as plenty of active listening practice as you would in a deep study method.
Number 3 is to don't get down on yourself. We know life is busy. We have kids. We're a family, we're a working family, we understand that as well, that it's difficult to allocate out time to do these hour-long study sessions. We get it. So don't get down on yourself when you plan for one and you can't make it, because that is part of life. It's also just a part of learning.
Likewise, though, you need to schedule a time to sit down and do deep study. Deep study is not one of those things you could just do off the cuff or wing it. You've got to actually have a plan. That means knowing what you're going to do, breaking it down, setting down a time in your calendar set aside for this. And yes, things are going to interrupt that. Yes, things are going to happen that makes it not possible. Set a date again. Because honestly, the biggest hindrance to our learning a language is ourselves. We will procrastinate, or we'll think, I deserve to rest tonight instead of studying, or I just don't feel like it today, or I'm not in the mood for it today. That's not how you learn a language. Language learning is consistency, and you can help yourself a lot if you would just schedule it out.
Another thing about that, though, is to set a timer. Set a timer so you don't go over studying. Especially as advanced learners, we can try to focus so much and we spend so much time over and above what we should be spending. If we're spending 5 or 6 hours on 5 minutes of material, we're not going to be able to remember all that. So what we need to do is we need to set a timer to say, hey, at an hour, that's my cap. Or at 30 minutes, that's my cap. And I don't need to go beyond that. That's part of being diligent about time management, even within the study session.
Moreover, 4 hours of study once a week is not going to do you any good at this point in language learning. You can pour into that. It will build your short-term memory, but it's not going to build your long-term memory. Advanced English learners, I hope you get this, because I have way too many students that try to just cram it in there, their 1 day off a week. It's not realistic. Until you are doing English, regardless of whether you're tired or very energetic, or whether you're on vacation, or whether you're at work, you need to be doing English consistently. And that means a little every day. And if you have a little bit more time to do deep study on your 1 day off, that's great, but set a timer. because 4 hours on Saturday is not going to help you get any closer to fluency when compared with 15 minutes of deep study every day. That 15 minutes is going to go far further than batch studying.
If you don't even have 30 minutes, try to shorten all this down so you can do it in one setting. Don't try to stretch this out across multiple settings. Be realistic, set a timer, get down to it, and make sure that you can get through the material within that one setting.
If that means you do only 1 page of a book, or you do 1 paragraph in an article, or you do 2 minutes of audio, that's fine. The point is you're taking the time to dive deep. And that doesn't mean all the time should be diving deep, but that makes you have spent 2 minutes of content going deep. You've spent 30 minutes or 20 minutes on that 2 minutes to help you notice things. Take the time to slow down and notice things culturally that you wouldn't have noticed otherwise.
Thank you guys so much for watching this video, and we will catch you on the next one.